I stood frozen in front of my cabin door, key in hand, unable to believe what I was seeing. My key didn't work. The locks had been changed while I was at work. A red notice taped to the door mockingly informed me, "Contact HOA office for new keys." After 14 hours at my security consulting job, this was the last thing I needed. Before you watch full story, please comment down your country name. I would love to hear. The temperature was dropping as night fell, and exhaustion weighed on me like a physical burden. I tried calling the HOA office 3 times but only got voicemail. No emergency number. No explanation. Just a piece of paper and a strange lock keeping me from my own bed. Rain began to fall as I stood there, my laptop bag growing heavy on my shoulder. I had no family in the area and most of my neighbors kept to themselves, exactly why I'd chosen this cabin community in the first place. Privacy had been my priority. Now that privacy had been violated in the most brazen way possible. What Barbara Whitmore and her HOA thugs didn't realize when they invaded my cabin was that I had designed the entire security system. Every corner of my home was recording their illegal actions, every whispered conversation, document theft, and corrupt plan captured in perfect detail. I pulled out my phone and opened my security app. The facial recognition alert from earlier that day suddenly made sense. Barbara Whitmore, Walter Chambers, and Greg Bennett, the unholy trinity of Sunnyvale Estates, had entered my home at 2:17 p.m. I watched in growing anger as they moved through my living room, Walter pointing to various items while Barbara nodded approvingly. Greg, the neighborhood locksmith, measured my door frame before the video ended. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," I whispered, rain dripping from my hair as I headed back to my car. "I get a hotel for tonight. Tomorrow I'd start making them regret ever touching my door." How it all started: I moved to Sunnyvale Estates 3 years ago after landing a major security contract that finally gave me financial breathing room. After years of apartment living, I'd been thrilled to find a place of my own, even with the steep $300 monthly HOA fee. The cabins here weren't just homes. They were status symbols with perfect lawns, architectural harmony, and expensive cars in every driveway. My cabin at 17 Oak Ridge Lane had been my proudest achievement. My parents had been renters their entire lives, and I was the first in my family to own property. The day I closed on the cabin was one of my proudest moments. Making that transition from renter to owner felt like crossing an invisible class boundary. Being a security consultant wasn't just my profession, it was my calling. It started back in college when my roommate's laptop was stolen with his thesis on it. Watching him lose months of work sparked something in me, a determination to create systems that protect what matters most to people. After graduating, I worked for 3 top security firms before branching out on my own. My specialty became creating adaptive security systems that not only deterred intrusions but documented them in ways that would withstand legal scrutiny. These professional skills would soon become desperately needed in my personal life. As a security expert, I installed cameras and sensors throughout my cabin during the first month. Not the obvious stuff that would trigger HOA complaints about exterior modifications, but hidden cameras in bird feeders, books, and clock radios. Motion sensors disguised as decorative molding. Pressure plates under certain floorboards. I even had a complete backup system that operated independently from the main grid, using cellular connections rather than Wi-Fi. Maybe it was paranoia, but my profession had taught me that preparedness prevents problems. I never imagined I'd need this system to protect me from the very organization that was supposed to protect my property values. The first 2 months at Sunnyvale were mostly smooth. Neighbors were cordial if somewhat reserved. I enjoyed the walking trails and community pool that supposedly justified the hefty monthly fees. I even joined the Neighborhood Watch program, offering some basic security suggestions that were politely acknowledged then promptly ignored. That initial dismissal should have been my first warning. The troubles began one Tuesday morning with a letter in my mailbox. The official Sunnyvale Estates letterhead contained a notice about my flower pots. Apparently, my terracotta planters violated the approved aesthetic guidelines, and the purple-pink petunias I'd planted were unapproved colors for the spring quarter. I actually laughed out loud, thinking it was some kind of welcome prank from neighbors. It wasn't. A second letter arrived a week later, this one with a $50 fine attached. That's when I decided to attend my first HOA meeting and see who exactly was micromanaging the color of my flowers. That's when I met Barbara Whitmore, the HOA president. She was in her early 50s, immaculately dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit with tasteful gold jewelry. Her smile never reached her eyes, which remained coldly calculating even as she welcomed new faces to the meeting. She ran the meeting like a military operation, cutting off questions and rushing through financial reports so quickly that nobody could follow along. That night, Barbara unveiled her new pet project, a special renovation fund requiring each household to contribute $1,500 for community improvements. When I politely asked for a detailed breakdown of the planned expenses, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Barbara's smile tightened as she explained that all financial decisions had been thoroughly vetted by the board and were too complex to discuss in a general meeting. The way she stared at me afterward made it clear I'd crossed some invisible line. People actually moved their chairs away from mine slightly, as if questioning the HOA budget was somehow contagious. After the meeting, a woman named Priya approached me in the parking lot. She was a lawyer specializing in real estate, though I didn't know that yet. "Word of advice," she said in a hushed tone, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "Don't make waves with Barbara. The last guy who questioned the financials found himself drowning in violation notices until he sold and moved away." Her warning was both kind and ominous. I thanked her and headed home, my mind already calculating the risk factors in my new living situation. Barbara Whitmore had just been upgraded from annoying bureaucrat to potential threat in my mental security assessment. The harassment begins. The changes were subtle at first. Casual greetings from neighbors became curt nods. Invitations to neighborhood functions mysteriously stopped. Then came an email notification that I was the only resident who hadn't contributed to the special fund yet, followed by a personal call from Barbara. "Community participation is a cornerstone of Sunnyvale values," she said, her voice carrying that special kind of threat wrapped in syrupy politeness that made my skin crawl. "We'd hate to see anyone feel unwelcome." That evening, I checked my security footage and noticed something odd. Someone had been in my front yard at 2 a.m. 2 nights ago. The figure wore a hooded jacket, but their distinctive limp matched Walter Chambers' gait perfectly. He wasn't just passing by, he was methodically examining my front door frame, testing my windows and taking what appeared to be measurements. The implications were disturbing. This wasn't random vandalism or teenage mischief. This was calculated reconnaissance. I spent that night reviewing my cabin's vulnerabilities, making notes on entry points that needed additional protection, and ordering specialized equipment that would arrive in discreet, unmarked packages. If the HOA wanted to play surveillance games, they had chosen the wrong opponent. By dawn, I had developed a 3-phase security enhancement plan and made my first entries in what would become a meticulous log of every interaction with HOA members. Something told me documentation would become my most powerful weapon in the battles ahead. I started researching HOA rules and discovered I had the legal right to request detailed financial records. I drafted a formal letter citing specific laws and hand-delivered it to the HOA office. The administrative assistant's eyes widened slightly as she read the heading, but she assured me Barbara would respond promptly. 3 days later, instead of financial records, I received a violation notice. Lawn grass exceeding 2.5 inches in height, $100 fine. The day after I trimmed the grass, another notice appeared. Trash receptacle position 6 inches beyond designated placement area, another $100. By the end of 2 weeks, I had received 6 separate violations totaling $900, each one more ridiculous than the last. One citation was for unapproved window cleaning solution leaving visible streaks, $150. I met Priya for coffee to discuss the situation. Her luxury sedan had a small dent in the driver's door that she nervously explained had appeared overnight. "Barbara's infamous for her death by 1,000 cuts approach," she explained. "She's been doing this for years. Most people just give up and pay whatever she asks." Priya told me about Luis Rodriguez, another homeowner who had gone through similar harassment after questioning a suspicious landscaping contract last year. He finally moved out after they began photographing his children's toys left in the yard and sending him daily fines. I started documenting everything, photographing my lawn daily, recording the exact position of my trash cans, and keeping detailed notes of every interaction with HOA members. If they wanted to play by the rules, I'd make sure I knew the rulebook better than they did. Digging deeper, the more I investigated Sunnyvale Estates' regulations, the more alarming inconsistencies I found. The official bylaws filed with the county differed significantly from the version distributed to homeowners, with the HOA's version granting them far more power over property decisions. The financial disclosures from the past 5 years showed patterns of suspicious transactions to vendors that either didn't exist or were registered to relatives of board members. Most disturbing was the discovery that the HOA had placed liens on 7 properties in the past 4 years, an almost unheard of frequency for a neighborhood of our size. It was becoming clear that Barbara wasn't just a power-hungry busybody. She was running a sophisticated scheme designed to intimidate, extract money, and potentially force out homeowners who didn't fall in line. I installed 4 additional hidden cameras around my property, high-resolution models with night vision capabilities that transmitted to secure cloud storage that even I couldn't delete or modify once recordings were saved. This immutable record would ensure that any evidence collected would stand up to claims of tampering. I also set up a dedicated computer in my home office running specialized software that logged every electronic communication from the HOA and backed up copies to 3 separate secure servers. Some might call this paranoia. I called it preparation. My father always said, "Hope for peace but prepare for war." This situation was definitely becoming the latter. The breaking point: driving home from work one evening, I spotted a black SUV parked across from my cabin. Inside sat Walter Chambers, the HOA vice president and a former cop who'd been discharged under murky circumstances, along with Greg Bennett, the local locksmith who did all the official HOA maintenance. They weren't even trying to be subtle, openly watching my home and taking notes. I noticed Officer Ryan Daniels, one of the local police, slowly driving by as well. He gave me a neutral nod but kept driving. I'd later learn he had been watching Walter's activities around the neighborhood for months, suspecting something wasn't right but lacking evidence to act. After I missed the deadline to pay my accumulated fines, Barbara sent a final warning letter threatening legal action if I didn't comply immediately. That same night, my cameras caught Greg and Walter prowling around my property after midnight. They were testing windows, photographing my porch, and even trying to peek through my blinds. I called Priya immediately. "They're building a case against you," she warned. "Barbara has connections at the county courthouse. Her brother-in-law is a clerk there. You need to be extremely careful." I decided to take her advice, but not in the way she expected. Instead of backing down, I began installing additional hidden surveillance. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but on my terms. "I've been dealing with security threats my entire career," I told Priya when she expressed concern about my plan. "Corporate espionage, international hackers, even state-sponsored attacks. Barbara Whitmore is just another threat model, and a predictable one at that." What I didn't tell Priya was that I was setting up what security professionals call a honeypot, a system designed to look vulnerable while actually monitoring anyone who tries to exploit it. I created a second Wi-Fi network with intentional security holes, planted an easily discoverable external hard drive with fake financial information, and even left what appeared to be banking documents carelessly visible through my office window. Then I waited, knowing that people who abuse power eventually overreach. I received an official HOA letter labeled, "Urgent Legal Notice," the following morning. It detailed all my unpaid fines, now with added late fees, and gave me 48 hours to pay or face a lien on my property. As I read it, my security app pinged. Night vision footage showed Greg snooping around my backyard again, this time with what looked like measuring tools. When I mentioned this to Priya, she became genuinely worried. "Nathan, these people have driven out families before. They won't stop until they get what they want." I smiled for the first time in days. "I'm counting on that," I replied. Standing in my basement that night, I finalized what I called my Eagle Eye Protocol, a comprehensive surveillance system that would capture everything happening in and around my home without anyone knowing it existed. The HOA thought they were dealing with a typical homeowner they could bully into submission. They had no idea they were targeting someone who made his living by staying one step ahead of people trying to breach security systems. The lockout 2 days after receiving the legal notice, I made a calculated move that would either defuse the situation temporarily or accelerate it dramatically. I paid exactly half of the fines, $450, with a detailed letter disputing the remaining charges and once again requesting the financial records I was legally entitled to review. The letter was polite but firm, crafted with Priya's legal guidance to signal compliance with reasonable requests while standing my ground on excessive violations. The strategy was designed to force Barbara into a decision: either accept my partial payment and address my legal requests, or escalate further and potentially expose the HOA to greater scrutiny. I hand-delivered this package to ensure it couldn't be lost in the mail, and used my phone to secretly record the interaction with the office staff. The response came faster than I expected. That very evening, as I was reviewing security footage from the previous night, a knock came at my door. Standing on my porch was Denise Peterson, the HOA secretary, flanked by Walter, who remained a few steps behind her with his arms crossed. "The board has reviewed your partial payment," Denise began in an artificially sweet voice that didn't match her tense expression. We've decided to reject it and require payment in full by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Additionally, the board feels your continued requests constitute harassment of volunteers, and we've added a $200 administrative fee to cover the time spent responding to your inquiries. The calculated cruelty of their approach was impressive in its efficiency, not only rejecting a good faith payment but punishing me further for exercising my legal rights. What they couldn't see was that our entire conversation was being recorded from 3 different angles, with audio enhancement capturing every word with perfect clarity. As they left, Walter turned back with a smirk. You know, Powell, neighborhoods like this require a certain type of resident who understands community standards. Not everyone is a good fit here. The threat wasn't subtle, but neither was my response, though I kept it entirely to myself. By morning, I had created a secure website documenting every violation notice, every communication, and every late-night visit to my property, all time-stamped and authenticated. If anything happened to me or my home, this digital insurance policy would automatically release to local media, state regulators, and law enforcement. The game was changing. From defense to counterintelligence, and I was prepared to take it as far as necessary. 3 weeks later, I had a 3-day business trip to Seattle that couldn't be postponed. Before leaving, I asked Luis to keep an eye on my place and completed the final touches on my Eagle Eye security system. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, and remote-controlled audio recording devices that I could monitor and control from anywhere. The system was designed to operate independently from my home's power and internet, using cellular connections and battery backups that would keep running even if the main utilities were cut. I had a gut feeling something would happen while I was away, and unfortunately, I was right. My security app alerted me during a client meeting on my second night away. The footage showed Walter and Greg approaching my back door just after midnight, using flashlights and speaking in hushed tones. "This is the perfect opportunity," Walter said as Greg examined my locks. "He's out of town until tomorrow night. Make sure you do a clean job. We need this to look official." I watched in real time as Greg picked my lock with practiced ease, and they both entered my home. I immediately activated all interior cameras and recording devices. For the next 2 hours, they methodically went through my house, not just examining the water heater they would later claim was leaking gas, but rifling through my office drawers, photographing documents, and Greg connecting a device to my computer that appeared to be copying my hard drive. "Look at this," Greg said excitedly, pointing to my security system designs. "Walter, these are the blueprints for the whole neighborhood security setup. This could be worth a fortune to the right buyer." What they didn't realize was that my actual system designs were securely stored on encrypted servers, not on my home computer. What they were stealing was an elaborate decoy, detailed enough to look legitimate but with subtle flaws that would render any system built from them fundamentally compromised. I had prepared for this possibility months ago, creating a digital Trojan horse that would allow me to track anyone who attempted to use the stolen designs. As they continued their illegal search, I was already documenting each violation with timestamps, clear video, and audio that captured their explicit intentions. Their casual conversation revealed something else disturbing. This wasn't the first time they had entered homes without permission. They discussed previous inspections at the Rodriguez and Freeman residences, mentioning items Greg had acquired during those visits. The sophistication of their operation surprised even me. Walter had a list of specific documents to look for, including tax returns, investment records, and anything related to my employment or security contracts. Their thoroughness suggested a level of planning beyond simple harassment. They were building a comprehensive profile they could exploit. At one point, Greg found my fake investment portfolio showing non-existent holdings worth over $3 million. Walter's eyes lit up in the infrared camera view. "Jackpot," he whispered. "Barbara's going to want to see this immediately." I felt a chill watching them photograph these documents, knowing they had just taken my carefully placed bait. The invasion of privacy was nonetheless infuriating, and I had to resist the urge to call the police immediately. Doing so would blow my broader operation before I had enough evidence to take down the entire corrupt board. When I landed back in town the following evening, I drove straight home, only to find that my key no longer worked in the front door. Not just that, my entire front door had been replaced with one in a slightly different color. A red tape notice was stuck to it reading, "Contact HOA office for new keys." As I stood there stunned, I noticed someone watching me from an HOA vehicle parked down the street. The car slowly backed up and drove away when they realized I'd spotted them. My phone buzzed with an email notification from the HOA about an emergency intervention, due to a suspected gas leak from the water heating system, based on an urgent inspection report from a contractor. They claimed the locks had been changed as a safety measure, and I would need to pay $750 for new keys plus a $500 emergency processing fee. I called Priya immediately, who met me at my cabin within 20 minutes. Luis joined us shortly after, confirming he hadn't seen any gas company vehicles or received any emergency notifications as a neighbor. "This is completely illegal," Priya fumed, examining the notice. "They can't just enter your home and change the locks without proper notification, even with HOA bylaws." As we were discussing options, Walter drove up in his SUV, stepping out with an air of authority that came from his years as a police officer. "We had an emergency situation, Mr. Powell," he said with fake concern. "Gas leaks are serious business. We had to act quickly for the safety of the neighborhood." When I asked to see the inspection report, he became evasive. "The paperwork is being processed. You'll get a copy with your new keys, after the fees are paid, of course." Officer Ryan Daniels happened to drive by during this confrontation, slowing down to observe. Walter's demeanor changed subtly at the sight of the police car, becoming slightly more conciliatory. "Look, I understand this is inconvenient, but procedures are procedures. The office opens at 9 o'clock tomorrow. You can settle everything then." After they left, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from suppressed rage. I'd never considered myself a vengeful person, but in that moment, I understood why people sometimes went to extreme lengths when pushed beyond their limits. "I'll need to stay at a hotel tonight," I told Priya, careful to maintain the appearance of defeat. "But don't worry, I've got everything under control." What I didn't tell her was that I had already downloaded hours of footage showing Walter and Greg's illegal activities in my home, including clear evidence they had never once checked my water heater during their emergency inspection. Gathering evidence that night in the hotel, I meticulously reviewed all the footage, creating multiple backups stored in different secure locations. The depth of their violation was staggering. They had spent over 2 hours in my home, with 45 minutes dedicated solely to my home office. Greg had installed something on my computer that looked suspiciously like keylogging software, while Walter had taken photos of every piece of mail on my desk. They had opened my kitchen cabinets, dresser drawers, even my medicine cabinet, none of which had anything remotely to do with a gas leak. Most tellingly, they spent less than 2 minutes in the utility room where the water heater was actually located, and neither of them. Nature of their emergency couldn't have been more obvious. While analyzing the footage, I discovered something I'd missed during the live viewing. At one point, Walter had made a phone call. Enhancing the audio revealed a conversation with Barbara where he explicitly stated, "We're in Powell's house now. No issues so far. We'll have everything we need to move forward with the plan." Barbara's response wasn't clear, but Walter's next statement was chilling. "Don't worry, by this time next month, he'll be begging to sell." This confirmed what I had suspected. The harassment wasn't random, it was a coordinated strategy to force me out of my home. The question was, why? What made my particular property so important to them? I needed to understand their motivation to effectively counter their next moves. The next morning, I reluctantly paid the extortionate fees for my new keys, playing the part of the defeated homeowner perfectly. Barbara personally handed me the keys with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're so glad the situation was resolved before anyone got hurt," she said sweetly. "Safety is our primary concern at Sunnyvale Estates." I nodded meekly and thanked her, noticing the triumphant gleam in her eyes as I walked away. She thought she had won. Back in my cabin, the extent of their invasion became clear. Drawers were slightly ajar, papers rearranged, and my personal items moved. My computer showed signs of tampering, though the security measures I'd installed had prevented any actual breach. Most disturbingly, the footage revealed that Greg had not only replaced my locks but had also copied the hard drive containing my security system designs and handed it to Walter, something that went far beyond their fabricated concerns about gas leaks and created a much stronger motive for extortion. As I carefully inspected every room, I discovered additional evidence of their thorough search. They had even checked under my mattress and inside my air vents. In my home office, I found fingerprint dust on several surfaces, indicating they had been searching for my fingerprints. This suggested a level of sophistication beyond typical harassment. They were gathering materials they could potentially use to implicate me in something. The violation felt deeply personal, as if they had not just invaded my home but were attempting to hijack my identity for their own purposes. I spent the rest of the day setting up additional security measures, reinforcing door frames, adding interior door locks that couldn't be picked, and installing pressure sensors under certain floorboards that would alert me to any intruders. For the next 2 weeks, I implemented what military strategists call false flag operations. I became the model resident, paying all outstanding fines without complaint, attending community events with a smile, and even volunteering to help with the neighborhood newsletter. Barbara was visibly pleased, clearly believing she had broken my will. Little did she know that behind my newly compliant facade, I was executing Operation Eagle Eye, a comprehensive surveillance operation targeting the HOA leadership. I installed microcameras in public areas of the neighborhood clubhouse where HOA meetings were held, placed motion-activated audio recorders in strategic locations, and even managed to gain access to their email server through a security vulnerability I discovered in their system. The intelligence I gathered was more damning than I'd anticipated. During a late-night meeting at Barbara's house, I captured clear footage of her accepting an envelope from a man in a navy blue suit who was later identified as a developer interested in purchasing community land. "The special fund is almost ready," Barbara told him as she counted the cash. "Once we have everyone's contribution, we'll have enough leverage to push the sale through without a community vote." I didn't just record audio, I had visual evidence of Barbara taking what appeared to be a bribe, Walter discussing how they could force Powell to sell his house because he knows too much, and Denise Peterson, the HOA secretary, falsifying financial reports to hide their misappropriation of funds. My digital reconnaissance wasn't limited to surveillance cameras. I created a sophisticated network analysis system that tracked all electronic communications to and from the HOA office, revealing patterns of communication with developers, contractors, and what appeared to be shell companies created to launder funds skimmed from community fees. The private email exchanges between board members contained explicit discussions about targeting problem homeowners, with fabricated violations until they either paid up or moved out. My name appeared with disturbing frequency in these exchanges, often paired with phrases like potential troublemaker and needs special handling. One particularly disturbing email from Barbara to Walter read, "Powell's background makes him dangerous. If standard pressure doesn't work, we'll need to consider more creative solutions." This revelation explained the escalating nature of their tactics. They weren't just harassing me over petty violations, they viewed me as a genuine threat to their operation. My security expertise and natural skepticism made me the worst possible neighbor for their schemes. I began compiling a detailed timeline, correlating board actions with property sales, discovering that every time a resident was forced out through harassment, their property was quickly purchased by one of 3 investment companies, all of which traced back to a single holding company partially owned by Barbara's late husband's estate. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity: drive out homeowners through harassment, acquire their undervalued properties through shell companies, and then resell at market rates or hold until property values increased further. My carefully crafted submissive persona was occasionally difficult to maintain, particularly when Barbara stood up at an HOA meeting and announced her victory in securing the special renovation fund and promised to continue maintaining standards for stubborn residents. During a neighborhood barbecue, Barbara publicly disparaged me, implying I was a troublemaker who had finally learned his lesson. I remained silent, eyes downcast, while my sister Amelia, who was visiting that weekend, discreetly live-streamed the entire interaction. "You like making up rules?" I thought to myself as Barbara gloated. "I'm writing them down for you to read later." The strain of playing this double role took its toll. One evening, as Amelia helped me organize the evidence, I had a moment of doubt. If I go through with this, am I any better than they are? I wondered aloud. I've thought about selling the cabin and just walking away. Amelia placed her hand on my shoulder. "But if you run away, who's going to stop them from doing this to someone else?" She was right, of course. This had become about more than just my cabin. It was about standing up to bullies who had been terrorizing an entire community for years. Meanwhile, Priya, who had initially been hesitant to officially take on the HOA due to concerns about her professional reputation, became fully committed to the cause after witnessing the lock-changing incident firsthand. "What they did to you was criminal," she said firmly. "And I'm guessing you're not their first victim." My investigation revealed that Barbara, Walter, and Denise had been running their scheme for years. They had forced 5 other families to sell their homes over the past 3 years alone, always using the same pattern of harassment, fabricated violations, and escalating fines. But their current plan was far more ambitious. They were secretly planning to sell a portion of the community's common land to a developer for nearly $1 million without informing the residents. The Special Renovation Fund was never intended for improvements. It was designed to cover up the land sale preparation costs while they pocketed substantial kickbacks. I discovered all this by tracking Walter's movements through a USB drive he had stolen from my office. A drive I had fitted with a tracking chip and filled with enticing but ultimately useless security information. The turning point in my investigation came when I discovered why they seemed so focused on my particular property. My cabin sat on a corner lot that bordered the eastern section of the community park, the same section they were secretly planning to sell to developers. According to architectural plans I found buried in their email server, the developer wanted to create a new access road that would run directly through where my cabin currently stood. If I could be forced out, they could purchase my property through their shell company, demolish the house, and create the access road the developer needed, potentially increasing the value of the land deal by several $100,000. This explained the escalating pressure and their increasingly desperate tactics. With this knowledge, I adjusted my strategy. It wasn't enough to simply document their harassment. I needed to catch them explicitly discussing the land deal and their plans to force me out. I began focusing my surveillance efforts on Barbara's home office and the weekly strategy sessions she held with Walter and Denise. Using directional microphones and long-range cameras, I was able to capture several damning conversations, including one where Barbara explicitly stated, "Once Powell's out, we can finalize the eastern parcel deal. The developer says they'll increase the payment by $200,000 if we can guarantee the corner lot for the access road." Walter's response was equally incriminating, "Don't worry. Between the fines, the liens, and what we found in his computer, he'll be gone within 30 days. To maintain my cover as the defeated homeowner, I began attending neighborhood functions with an air of resigned compliance. I volunteered for cleanup committees, nodded agreeably during HOA presentations, and even made a show of meticulously maintaining my lawn to their exact specifications. At one particularly painful community dinner, I had to endure Barbara's condescending pep talk about the importance of community standards, while she stood with her arm around my shoulder for a photo opportunity. It took every ounce of self-restraint not to reveal that I knew about her scheme. Instead, I smiled weakly for the camera while using a specially designed pen in my shirt pocket to record the entire conversation. Early May brought the first real test of my patience and planning. The HOA announced a safety inspection of my home, scheduled for the exact time I needed to monitor a secret meeting between Barbara and the developer. This couldn't be coincidence. They were deliberately trying to keep me occupied while they finalized their land sale deal. At the same time, Barbara had begun a public smear campaign against me in the community newsletter and local paper, painting me as a troublesome resident, with vague accusations about disruptive behavior. One formerly supportive neighbor even sent me an apologetic note saying they couldn't be associated with me anymore, making me feel increasingly isolated just when I needed allies most. I needed a solution that would allow me to be in two places at once. "I can set up a fake inspection scenario," I explained to Luis. "Motion-triggered recordings of me moving around the house, lights on timers, and a rigged system that will make it appear I'm home while I'm actually monitoring their meeting." The plan was risky. If the inspector became suspicious, the entire operation could be compromised. But I had no choice. The land sale meeting represented our best chance to gather conclusive evidence of the HOA's corruption. While preparing for this high-stakes gambit, I made another disturbing discovery about Greg Bennett. He wasn't just a locksmith with a criminal past. He was an active thief who had been stealing from homes during official inspections for years, all with Walter's protection. Among the items he had taken from my home was a USB drive, one I had deliberately left out, containing tracking software that now allowed me to monitor his movements throughout the neighborhood. The night before the scheduled inspection, Luis helped me set up my elaborate ruse while Priya reviewed our growing legal case. "Once we have evidence from tomorrow's meeting, we'll have enough to approach the district attorney," she said, now fully committed to bringing down the HOA after seeing the extent of their corruption. "Just be careful, Nathan. These people are desperate, and Walter especially is dangerous when cornered." I appreciated her concern, but the time for caution had passed. "Barbara thinks she's running this neighborhood like her personal kingdom," I replied. "Tomorrow she finds out what happens when the peasants revolt." That night, I experienced a moment of doubt, wondering if all this effort was worth it. I could sell my cabin, take the loss, and move somewhere without an HOA. But then I remembered the other families who had already been driven out and the many more who would suffer if Barbara's reign continued. The next day's dual operation began smoothly. The inspector arrived at my home and was greeted by my elaborately designed automation system, which played pre-recorded responses through the intercom and simulated movement inside the house. Meanwhile, I positioned myself at Luis's house across from the country club where Barbara's secret meeting was taking place. Using a high-powered directional microphone and a camera with a telephoto lens, we captured every detail of the conversation between Barbara, Walter, Denise, and the developer. "The eastern parcel is yours once we clear the final hurdles," Barbara assured him, accepting another envelope. "The special fund gives us cover for the preliminary work, and most residents don't read the fine print anyway." The developer seemed concerned about potential opposition. "What about that security consultant who's been asking questions?" Barbara's response chilled me. "Powell won't be a problem much longer. We've got something special planned for him this weekend." I was so focused on the meeting that I almost missed the alert from my home security system. The inspector had gone off script and was attempting to access areas of my cabin that weren't part of the approved inspection route. Switching to my home cameras, I watched in alarm as Greg deliberately damaged some electrical fixtures and placed a small package, likely drugs, in my bedroom closet. "They're planting evidence," I realized with a surge of anger. The setup was now clear. They planned to discover illegal substances during an inspection, giving them grounds for immediate eviction and possibly criminal charges. This was no longer just about harassment or financial fraud. They were actively trying to destroy my life. While monitoring this unfolding crisis at my home, I received an unexpected call from Martin Freeman. "Nathan, get back here now," he whispered urgently. "Walter just left the meeting early and is heading to your place with Officer Collins. Not Daniels but Collins, Walter's old partner from the force. They're talking about an anonymous tip about drug activity." My carefully constructed plan was falling apart. If Walter arrived with a police officer while Greg was still planting evidence, I could face serious charges. "I'm on my way," I told Martin, already rushing to my car. "Call Priya and tell her to meet me there. And Luis, send all the meeting footage to Officer Daniels immediately." The stakes had just gone from winning a neighborhood dispute to potentially fighting for my freedom. As I sped home, my mind raced with contingency plans. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt genuinely afraid, not of Barbara or Walter, but of how far they were willing to go to protect their scheme and what that might mean for everyone involved. I barely made it back to my neighborhood before Walter's SUV turned onto my street, a police cruiser following close behind. I parked 2 blocks away and circled around through backyards to reach my home undetected. Greg was just exiting my back door when I slipped inside through a concealed entrance I had installed for exactly this type of emergency. He hadn't noticed me, too focused on making his escape before Walter arrived with Officer Collins. Once inside, I quickly activated my home's true security protocol, not the decoy system that Greg had been tampering with, but the comprehensive defensive grid that had been monitoring his every move. Within seconds, I had transferred all footage of Greg planting evidence to a secure cloud server and activated a special subsystem I called Spider's Web Protocol. Walter and Officer Collins arrived moments later, knocking forcefully on my front door. Through my security feed, I could see Barbara waiting in a car across the street, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed anticipation. I positioned myself strategically and then opened the door with an expression of confused innocence. "Officer, is something wrong?" Collins stepped forward, all business. "Mr. Powell, we've received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at this address. We need to take a look around." Walter stood slightly behind him, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just a routine check, Powell. I'm here as the HOA representative, for liability reasons." The fake concern in his voice made my skin crawl, but I maintained my composure. "Of course, officer, though I'm a bit confused about the HOA's involvement in a police matter," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. As they moved through my cabin, I watched Walter subtly directing Collins toward the areas where Greg had planted the evidence. "You might want to check the bedroom closet," he suggested with artificial casualness. "These older cabins sometimes have issues with contraband from previous owners." Collins gave him an odd look but proceeded to the closet anyway. It was at that precise moment that my doorbell rang. Priya had arrived right on cue. "Excuse me, officer," I said. "That's my attorney." The flash of panic on Walter's face was priceless as Priya entered, legal pad in hand and skepticism evident in her professional demeanor. "My client informed me of this surprise visit," she stated firmly. "May I ask the specific grounds for this search? Do you have a warrant, Officer Collins?" Collins looked uncomfortable. "We received an anonymous tip." Priya cut him off smoothly. "An anonymous tip is insufficient grounds for entering a private residence without a warrant, as I'm sure you're aware." The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Collins straightened, suddenly more cautious, while Walter began to sweat visibly. "Perhaps we could discuss this outside," Collins suggested, clearly reassessing the situation. As they moved toward the door, I casually pressed a button on my phone, activating the final phase of my plan. The large television in my living room flickered to life, displaying crystal-clear footage of Greg planting the package in my closet just 30 minutes earlier. "Actually, before you go, you might find this interesting," I said, gesturing to the screen. "This was recorded today. I have similar footage of Mr. Bennett and Mr. Chambers entering my home illegally multiple times over the past month, including footage of them copying my hard drives and searching through my personal documents." The color drained from Walter's face. That's doctored footage," he stammered. "He's trying to frame the HOA." Collins, however, was already reaching for his radio, his expression hardening as he watched Greg clearly planting evidence in my home. "I think I need to call this in," he said quietly, stepping away to request backup. Walter moved toward the door, but I wasn't finished yet. "Oh, and Walter, you might want to let Barbara know that Officer Daniels has already received all the footage of today's meeting with the developer, including the parts about the kickbacks and the planned land sale." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and the gradual unraveling of the HOA's corrupt empire. Officer Daniels arrived with a legitimate search warrant, not for my cabin but for the HOA office and Barbara's home, based on the evidence I had previously shared with him and the city attorney. As Barbara was escorted from her car in handcuffs, screaming about a setup and threatening lawsuits, I felt no satisfaction, only relief that the nightmare was finally ending. Priya stayed by my side throughout the process, lending her legal expertise and moral support. "You know, when you first came to me with this plan, I thought you were being paranoid," she admitted quietly. "I never imagined it went this deep." That evening, as police cars finally drove away and curious neighbors retreated to their homes, I sat alone in my living room, the adrenaline crash leaving me exhausted but clear-headed. I had activated my spider's web protocol not just as a defensive measure but as the culmination of months of careful planning. Every illegal action, every fraudulent document, every secret meeting had been recorded and cataloged, creating an evidence trail so comprehensive that not even Barbara's courthouse connections could make it disappear. I had sent copies to the district attorney, the state attorney general's office, and several trusted journalists. The web had closed and there would be no escape for the corrupt HOA leadership. As I stared at the wall of security monitors in my basement command center, watching police searching Barbara's home and the HOA office simultaneously, I realized that Barbara hadn't been entirely wrong in one respect. I was indeed a security threat, just not in the way she had imagined. The emergency community meeting the following weekend drew nearly every Sunnyvale Estates resident. The clubhouse buzzed with shocked conversations as people processed the arrests of Barbara, Walter, and Greg, along with the freezing of all HOA accounts pending investigation. I sat quietly in the back, observing the spectrum of reactions ranging from disbelief to vindication. Denise, who had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency, confirmed what many had suspected for years. Barbara had been systematically embezzling funds, harassing residents who questioned her authority, and most recently planning to sell community land without proper approval or transparency. When my name came up as the person who had exposed the scheme, all eyes turned to me. The same neighbors who had avoided me weeks earlier now regarded me with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "I think Mr. Powell deserves to explain what happened in his own words," Martin Freeman suggested, standing up from his chair. As I walked to the front of the room, I felt oddly calm. The anger and frustration that had driven me for months had dissipated, replaced by a sense of closure. "I never wanted to be at the center of this," I began. "All I asked for was transparency about our finances and fair treatment under the rules we all agreed to when moving here." I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up a carefully edited video compilation. Barbara changing my locks, Walter stealing documents, Greg planting drugs, all intercut with footage of their secret meetings discussing kickbacks and their plans to force me out. The TikTok-style quick cuts and clear captions drew audible gasps and even nervous laughter as the full extent of the corruption was laid bare. When Walter pulled open the safe in my office, fine dust exploded out, making him cough violently. Barbara covered her nose with a Chanel handkerchief, staring greedily at the folder of secret investment documents, as if she'd discovered a gold mine. "Look at this," her voice rang clearly through the clubhouse speakers. "Powell's sitting on millions from some tech investment. We can squeeze him for way more than just the special fund contribution." The footage continued, showing their plans to not only evict me but to extort money based on the fake investment documents I had planted as bait. When the video ended, the silence in the room was deafening. They didn't just target me, I explained quietly. Over the past 3 years, 5 other families were driven out using the same tactics. The special renovation fund was never meant for improvements, it was covering their preparations to sell the eastern section of our community park to developers for nearly $1 million, with substantial kickbacks for themselves. Officer Daniels took over from there, explaining the criminal charges being filed and the ongoing investigation into the HOA's finances. We found evidence of systematic fraud dating back at least 5 years, he told the stunned audience. And Mr. Powell's documentation was instrumental in breaking this case. The meeting then turned to the immediate need for an interim HOA board, with Priya nominated as temporary president until proper elections could be held. As practical matters were being discussed, I slipped out quietly, needing some time alone to process everything. Walking through the neighborhood park, the same one that would have been partially sold off without residents' knowledge, I reflected on the past months. The victory felt different than I had anticipated, not the vengeful satisfaction I had sometimes imagined, but something quieter and more profound. 3 months passed, bringing significant changes to Sunnyvale Estates. The new HOA board, elected with record resident participation, implemented transparent financial practices and reasonable enforcement of community standards. Barbara and Walter faced multiple criminal charges, including fraud, breaking and entering, evidence tampering, and attempted extortion. Greg turned state's evidence, revealing a pattern of theft during official inspections that had been overlooked by Walter during his time as the neighborhood security chair. The developer was under investigation as well, the land sale permanently canceled. As for me, I received numerous requests to consult on security for other neighborhoods fighting corrupt HOAs, turning my experience into an unexpected career opportunity. At the community's first successful block party under the new leadership, Priya found me sitting somewhat apart from the celebration. "You should be enjoying your hero status," she teased, handing me a drink. I shook my head. "I'm no hero. I just had the right skills at the right time." We watched children playing on the preserved park grounds, the same land that would have been bulldozed under Barbara's scheme. "You know," Priya said thoughtfully, "you never told me how you knew they'd take the bait with those fake investment documents." I smiled slightly. People who abuse power always want more. Barbara wasn't just power-hungry, she was greedy. The moment she thought I had money, her focus shifted from driving me out to getting her hands on that money. Classic predator behavior, they can't resist an easy target. As evening fell and the party wound down, Priya mentioned that several former board members who had worked with Barbara still seemed nervous around me. "They keep asking if you have evidence about them too," she said with curiosity. "Do you?" I looked out across the neighborhood I had fought so hard to protect. "I hope I never need to find out," I replied. "But as everyone here has learned, never underestimate the person who designed your security system." The small eagle-shaped camera on my bookshelf blinked from red to green, a silent signal that normal monitoring had resumed after months of heightened surveillance. For the first time since moving to Sunnyvale Estates, I felt like I was truly home.